Good morning. I've been given a hard task of giving you hope in a time of despair, but I'll try a bit. My story is about a journey that we began from 2013, when the issue of identity was closely linked to national security. And anytime you talk about identity, the flag of national security is raised at your hand, at your face. To the extent of your phone being tapped, to the extent of you being attached a guardian angel called national intelligence, and to a lot of extent, to the extent that now we can speak about it freely without any fear. And my talk comes from the 2024 Gen Z movement in Kenya. The slogan was Hatupangwingwi. Actually, Hatupangwingwi is a song that trended during the Gen Z movement that was opposing the finance bill that was basically very retrogressive. And it's a journey of appreciating the community that stood with the minority communities that I come from. I personally am a Nubian. I come from a minority community that our numbers are below 40,000 nationwide. In a population of over 50 million, our numbers are around 40,000. But why is it that it's important to talk about discrimination when it comes to identity? It is important because one out of 5 Kenyans have to go through discriminatory procedures and sometimes burdensome documentation. And with the discretion of the official, they can deny to issue a document. But why is this document important? When we come to the history of identity, it comes from a colonial regime. Kenya is a British colony, and our laws around identity comes from 1947, when we were still a colony of the British. Until now, over 60 years after independence, we still use the British law, the Registration of Persons Act of 1947. The document with a metal on the extreme left is what we call the Kipande. Kipande was a piece of metal that had a paper that has your detail. And you, as a black person, were supposed to wear it everywhere you go. In that document, it was written who you are and where you live, and the restriction of where you should not cross. So the history of identity is very important to understand when you're going to digitalize a system. Then after that, we had a second Kipande that was handwritten, that one at the bottom. It was also called a Kipande. But that one is what we call the first generation identity. You go to the chief, they ask you if you're old enough, tell you to hold your ears. If you can hold your ear, you're already 18. If you can't, if you're short, it means you'll have to wait to prove in other ways. So anyway, at that time, it was simple. You walk in, you walk out. Then, 1998 bombing of the US embassy happened. And everything turned around. Communities were profiled based on the fact that terrorism is ascribed to a religion and a name. Now, getting a document that was easy as holding your ear became as hard as paying bribes, as proving you're the tribe that you claim, and all those things that comes to it. To us in Kenya, an ID has a history of colonialism. You cannot move without an ID. And for those communities that were denied documents, it meant that your freedom of movement was curtailed. Because anywhere you go, the moment you meet a policeman, they ask you what? Umetoka wapi, unaenda wapi, wapi ID? Where are you from, where are you going, and where is your ID? So back to the colonial era of the present day. So our ID system is very important to understand the history before you digitalize. So as civil societies and communities that have had that problem, we were asking the government, before we move forward, we have to address our systemic injustices. We have to address our historical injustices. We have communities that are stateless in the country. We have communities that are Kenyans by law, but in practice have to go through rigorous discriminatory processes that we call vetting to prove, first, they are who they claim to be, second, they are the tribe that they claim to be, and third, they are Kenyans. And in this process, it is illegal for some communities to eat some particular foods, for example, matoke. It is illegal for some particular communities to travel to countries like Uganda and study because you are considered as transborder communities. And because of that, we wanted to have a comprehensive legal review to address this and say, so are we a tribal nation or are we basically a community? Because according to our law, if you were in the country by 13th December 1963, you're considered as a Kenyan. But according to the people interpreting the law, they say, if your community was among the 42 tribes in Kenya by 1963, you're a Kenyan. But these lists do not exist. These lists are basically a political statement, and it all comes back to the history of identity, which is colonialism. Kenya was divided into 43 ethnic tribes, which basically we were calling it ethnic districts. And Nairobi was the 43rd one. But because it's a cosmopolitan, if you claim that you're a Nubian and you're from Nairobi, they tell you, okay, where are you from? And if you understand history of colonialism, divide and rule was basically to divide communities into ethnicity, into regions, so that you can never unite to fight colonialism. So it goes back to the history. Long story short, in 2019, Kenya decided we have been struggling. And we are not going to miss out in the fourth revolution. And we are in this conference, we all know the fourth revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is data. So Kenyans rushed into data. They were like, this is the new oil, we have to mine it. We cannot miss out. We missed out in the industrial revolution. We can't miss out in the data revolution. So Kenya decided to shift to what we called a digital identity. And we called it NIMS, National Integrated Identity Management System, or popularly known as Huduma Namba. Huduma Namba came at a backdrop that we as communities that have suffered for decades to get recognized were pushing for comprehensive legal review so that we could be able to address our systemic injustices. For people working on digital rights, they were pushing for data protection. So there was a campaign to push for a Data Protection Act that could help us govern the data revolution that we are going to. For 5 years, the digital rights movement were pushing for this law to go, but it was not moving because there was no interest in it. So in 2019, when the government of Kenya decided that we are going to digitalize identity, they decided to introduce it through an omnibus bill. And if you understand an omnibus bill, it's a bill that amends several laws, and it's supposed to do basic touch-ups, like there was a typo, there's a bit of interpretation. For example, one of the things that they wanted to introduce was increase the definition of biometrics. And one of the things that they introduced was GPS data and DNA data in the biometrics. Another amendment that they brought into that omnibus bill was that the law did not provide for digitalization of identity data. In Kenya, basically, to understand civil registration, it's divided into several parts. Civil registration that governs birth, death, and marriages. We have national registration, NRB, that governs ID registration, and immigration that basically data governs issues of passports and alien registration. That falls with refugees and all that. So we have multiple registers that were being channeled under one register that we call the Integrated Population Register. It was already digitalized. The Integrated Population Register allowed corporates to be able to do what we call EKYC, Electronic Know Your Customer. So we already had functional data that could prove that Mustafa, who's in front of you, is the holder of an ID. The biggest problem was we already had corruption, whereby a single identity number could be shared by 5 people. It is a government problem. They're the ones who issued the ID. But now the problem was it was shifted to the citizens. And they said, we want to have a single source of truth, that if I give you a number, this is a number that only identifies you. But you are the one who flowed. You are the one who issues IDs. So if there are 5 people who have the same number, but they have other unique identifiers like names, date of birth, and all that, so how do you know who's the real owner of the ID number? They said, we are going to have mass registration for every person to come and register for 6 months. Within these 6 months, the person who will come and register will verify their data and give them a new number. So if you're going to verify, you're supposed to verify on an existing database. We already have an existing database that already has flows. First, multiple registration. Second, they claim that people have been buying documents. Third, they are like, we have multiple registers. How do we have one? Second blunder. They thought that centralization of the data was the ultimate solution for everything. But they didn't see the troubles that were ahead. Long story short, we went forward and did that registration. There are several hazards that arose. I said, out of 50 million, 5 million people struggle, which is 1 out of 5 people struggle to get documents. In that struggle, a big population of them do not have documentation. So when you're going to verify, if they do not exist, you will digitalize what we call digitalization of exclusion. So that was another problem that was coming. The other problem that was coming is we did not have an avenue of filing a complaint when you are aggrieved by the registration. Remember, they were going to do back-end processing of data. And we already have flows, of which one of them was saying, one ID number was shared by 5 people. But now the burden was being pushed to the citizen, that why did you have an ID number of another person? So basically, there are people who basically, based on the algorithm, will have been kicked out, and they will not know until the day that they're coming to a government officer, and they'll be told, well, your ID is already in the system with another person. Long story short, that is how we began the struggle for ID in Kenya. So the government said, we want to register this Huduma Namba. And they introduced the form for registration. It is the most hazardous way of collecting data. The best practices and best principles of data collection is what? Data minimalization. For us, because it's oil, you have to mine as much as you can. We were doing what? Data maximization. One, they say that they're not collecting tribe, but they already had tribe in the database. Two, they wanted to see your ID number. So if you did not exist, you did not have an ID number, how am I going to register you? You needed a pre-existing document. That is an exclusion problem. Then they had spaces for you to at least enter 5 spouses. So they wanted to know your spouses as a biometric. How? They did not only want to know their names, they wanted to know their ID numbers. But you're registering me. How is it connected to my spouses? They also wanted to know the size of the land that you have, the use of the land that you have, how many animals do you have, level of education you have, level of income you have, and some of the other things like parents' basic. The hazardous part that we fought as civil society was GPS and DNA data. All this was supposed to be profiling. But the other caveat down there was that they had asked you, there's a disclaimer in the form. I confirm that the information, including biometrics, provided by me is true, correct, and accurate. I'm aware that my information, including biometrics, will be used for generation of a Huduma Namba, which is a unique personal identifier across all government systems. And then, the worst, I understand that my information may be provided to an authorized government agency or agencies. So basically, the government was admitting that they're going to profile you, and this profile will be shared by agencies authorized by government, including who? The Transport Authority, including who? Corporates, because they pay for data from the government. it was opening a Pandora's box. Basically, we were waiving the freedom of right to privacy for mining of data. So, as I said, one of the biggest problems that we as civil society saw, I as a Nubian, was that our communities are going to be left out. We have stateless communities that struggle to get documentation. When you say that you want them to onboard into a digital system, but you require a prerequisite document, basically you're telling them, well, we are leaving you behind, and we don't care about you. You will catch up with us when you come up. So we wanted these historic injustices to be addressed. The other fear that we had is that there was going to be an algorithm that was going to process a lot of information. One of the flaws that we later on went to court about is that when they digitalized, they said, it is easy for a father to father 10 children in a year, but it's very hard for a mother to mother 2 children a year, not unless they're twins. So it is easier for children to be registered under their mothers compared to under their fathers. So this is a bias that someone decided to put in the database. What happened? Children born through mixed marriages, like refugee children, if your mother is a refugee but your father is a Kenyan, the laws of Kenya is a Jusoli nation, is that you can get nationality from either of your parents. But when the system only registers children under the mother, when the database is capturing that the mother is an alien, by default that child becomes an alien. So children born to Kenyan fathers whose mothers were refugees were left out. By default, they were assigned as refugees. So, worst of it, they are Muslims. Second, the mother is a refugee. By default, that child becomes at risk of statelessness because they'll never get a document. Stories are a lot, but I promise to give you some hope a bit. So, unfortunately, it's the time that the government had split, and fortunately also. Basically, the deputy president was the opposition, and the opposition leader was the government. So we capitalized on the division within government to tell the government, you know what? The deputy president, we told him, this is going to work against you. They're going to use it against you to capitalize on votes in 2022. It worked, because basically he was the first person within government to oppose a government project. Secondly, the role of the church. Some pastors said that this is the number of the beast. When you're allocating numbers to individuals, you are basically removing their names and you're allocating them numbers. You'll be recognizing them as digits and not individuals. So it worked for us. The other part is the government strategy was coercion. They were like, if you don't register within 6 months, your nationality is at risk. We capitalized on it. We're like, why will you compel someone to register? So when we went to court, one of the things that we asked the government, the judges was, why should someone be compelled to onboard on a system? It should be a voluntary registration process. And the government was basically told, you cannot coerce. Let people register. Secondly, registration does not revoke nationality, because one of the trending things that was going on was that if my document is no longer recognized, what does it mean? I'm no longer Kenyan. So we had a hashtag that basically you cannot say in the US, is that deport me now. So Kenyans were saying, deport me, and they were choosing countries that they wanted to be deported to. Some were saying Germany, some were saying Canada. So basically, there were a lot of controversies. Over 10 million people from the online campaign decided that they were not going to board. Hence, the slogan, Hatupangwingwi. Hatupangwingwi basically is that it's like me telling you, all of you coming this side, I am organizing you. I am forcing you to align by my standards. So the government tried to panga us, and we said, Hatupangwingwi. Okay? So the CSOs were the ray of hope for communities. And for me, this picture is a very powerful picture. We did not do public interest litigation. We did public-centered litigation. These communities were at the forefront of litigation. The three ladies, one of them is Aisha, Zara, and Zena. they were the people that were basically helping the communities understand what are the processes at every step of the court process. And in this case, this guy was the government expert witness. And after they trolled him after the case, and they were like, we are going to school him. He is misguided. He does not know what he's propagating, and he's on the wrong side of history. So he was trying to rush for his life, and these ladies were like sharing their peace of mind with him. And why am I saying it was a public-centered litigation? It's because the lawyer did not end at representing the community. At every stage, they were briefing the paralegals. The paralegals were briefing the community what was happening and where the hope was. And this basically was where we were winning at. The community was always full in court. They were always wanting to know what is happening about their case. Because of all that, we also did a lot of media campaign because we realized we are not going to fight in court alone. We needed a public movement. We began what you call the My ID, My Right campaign. It was on social media, on TikTok. As much as civil societies are shying away from TikTok, we went to TikTok. Did videos about people whose IDs were being denied over 20 years, 30 years, and they're being left out. They're being digitalized, digitally excluded because the new system needed them to have a prerequisite document. And because of that, we got some good traction. The photo at the bottom is our former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, and the title is Huduma Namba. Huduma in Kiswahili means oppression. That's not a tabloid. That's one of the mainstream media saying that this is an oppression number, basically because of the campaign that we had done. And also, one of the successes that we got was that the government was told, you cannot roll out this ID system without addressing issues of exclusion, without addressing issues of comprehensive protections that the civil society are championing for. So it was halted for some time. Things that were wins for us that the public had us. They were like, okay, what are the safeguards? Why are people making noise about this? We didn't have Data Protection Act in place, and we're digitalizing. And within that court process, when we were in court, the Data Protection Act that was stalling for over 5 years was passed because they realized the judges were going to ask for a Data Protection Act. In the Data Protection Act, it required a data protection impact assessment to have been done before a rollout. So the government had already put a cart before the horse. It was already an illegality that they had not seen, but they were preparing for failure. So when they passed the Data Protection Act, we asked to amend our plea, and we were like, now, the government has passed the act, but they didn't do a data protection impact assessment. So the whole system was declared a flaw because they had to have what? A data protection impact assessment to show what are the possible flaws and what are the possible remedies. A data protection commissioner was appointed. In Kenya, if any bill is a money bill, it takes longer because they have to appoint officers and all that. Funny enough, all this happened within a month. So sometimes when you push, good will happen by force. And the other things that we saw that was a win for us is that we feared that with GPS data, the government will profile. But they were asking us, but Facebook has your data. They profile you. TikTok has your data. Why do you fear government? Well, in Kenya, the government has Subarus, and they have Tiguans that they use for abductions. We fear them more than Facebook. They can make you disappear because they know where you are, and they know who is related to you. So we feared two things, our biometrics to capture our DNA and our GPS coordinates, because basically that is going to give the government a very powerful weapon against the citizens. And the courts help us to uphold that. So the other thing that we were asking the government and the courts found is that how is the data being stored? How is it being processed? And the government response was like the one of other. The data is well protected. No one can even break the wall. When you ask them who's the one handling the data, it is Kenyans. Which Kenyan? They didn't tell you. So there was no clarity. And learning from the 2012 and 2017 elections, when actually 2017 elections, when the court was asking the Electoral Commission to open their servers, they were like, you know, people in France are still sleeping, and our servers are in France. So, so we wanted to know our identity data, is it also in France? Because IDEMIA was also the same service provider for our digital ID. So we had our wins that we celebrate. And some of them were issues of collection of DNA, GPS, and also the issue of who's the custodian of the data. And it led to the government being told, well, you have collected data, you have already, because they were like, we've already finished registration. I'm like, okay, you keep the data, but don't process it until you have comprehensive legal review. So in 2022, when that government went out, the new government came in and said, you know what, we are not going to inherit the same sins of the other government. We want our new digital ID. And they were like, now, who are the civil societies that were opposing this system? And they used civil society to convince civil society. And the government brought over 50 civil societies in the room, and they were like, okay, we want to build a new database. We want it to be called the unique personal identifier, and we want you to help us develop it. We thought it was a good move. And for the first time, civil society that is always used to boxing were like, okay, what do we use these gloves of ours with? They were told, now we need to sit on the same table. And civil society is used to punching. And now you're being told, come and sit down with a pen on the table. So we helped the government for once, sat down, designed what we call the UPI. Later, it became what we call Maisha Namba. Remember, we asked the government, we wanted comprehensive legal review. The government said, you know, for birth registration, we are going to change what we call birth entry number and call it UPI number, because there is already legislation that allows us to track birth entry number. We were like, but we've been telling you to have a review of the Birth and Death Registration Act to allow you to digitalize. The amendment in the current identity allows us to digitalize our system. And we gave them feedback that the law that you amended to allow you to digitalize National Integrated Identity Management System is a law that only regulates registration of adults above 18. But you also want to register children. So basically, you don't have enough legal framework to roll out this system. And the other thing that we told them is that, what about exclusion? They said, we don't want prerequisite document. We will be registering as normal IDs. So basically, there were a bit of wins that we got and losses that we still suffer. Like, we still don't have legal framework that is enough to anchor this, but we can count ourselves lucky a bit because the government, during the rollout of the 5, because the new Maisha number has 5 tiers. It has UPI at birth, it has what we call Maisha number at 18, then it has Maisha number at death, then it has digital ID that you get on a system that basically you don't need, and later on we have what we call the Maisha Integrated Population Register. So, is it over? No. Is the fight over? No. Is there hope? Yes. So what's next? There's a move that we call the UPI movement. There's a whole campaign by the World Bank and funders like the Melinda and Gates Foundation that are pushing for what we call unique personal, for DPI, sorry, digital public infrastructure. They're like, the solution for corruption is to digitalize all government services. The solution for exclusion is to digitalize all government services. Then we were like asking, okay, if we digitalize, what are the problems of digitalization? We have aspects of digital divide. Kenya still struggles with the penetration of electricity into over 30% of the country. Leave alone electricity. We even struggle with the penetration of 4G and 3G. People have already gone to 5G. How are we digitalizing? And during the rollout of Maisha Namba, I was working in the task force as a representative of CSOs. And you are like asking government, what are the safeguards that you've put? They're like, okay, we are trying a pilot. And out of the pilot in the capital, we had a 40% success rate. Like, if you have a 40% success rate in the capital city, what about in the rural areas? And some of the flaws was that government staff are not digitally literate. If the government staff are not digitally literate, what about the population? So there are a lot of problems that are happening because of copy-pasting what is happening in Estonia into a country that has over 40 million. Estonia's population and Kenya's population is one side and another. Then you are told, okay, but other happened. Other is not a digital ID. It's a unique personal identifier number. For us, we want to copy-paste everything and just copy even the mistakes and everything. So, have I given you hope? Yeah, I would like to stop there because I could go on and on, but I would like to take some questions from you. This is a journey that I've worked for 13 years, and talking about it for these minutes is not enough, but I was just giving you, trying to shed light on what the CSOs did. From massive public campaigns, but at the end of it all, what we capitalized as civil society was putting the people in front. Because we realized one thing, the government has always cracked down on civil society, but they will never crack down on citizens because they're the voters. And in the Kenyan Constitution, the first article says, all sovereign powers belong to the people, and it can be exercised directly or indirectly. But it says shall for citizens, or may for indirect. So when you give the people who shall the power, the government can listen, and we're able to have a lot of wins.
Thank you so much, Mustafa Mahmoud. You've definitely given me some hope. I think just it's a great achievement already to get young people to be interested and to talk about topics such as digital ID and actually make a change. So we have some time for the Q&A. And I would like to ask all of you, if you have a question, to line up at one of the microphones here throughout the room. And to give you a bit of time to think about your question, we're going to start with one question from the internet, all the way in the back.
Yeah, in the internet there's the question, this all sounds like a very familiar story from the last time they tried to implement digital ID in the UK. Are you working with activists in other countries to share knowledge around what does and doesn't work in the space?
Sorry, I didn't get the question well.
Okay. The question was if you are working with activists in other countries, such as the UK, who are dealing with similar laws and proposals.
Yes, we have the Digital ID Coalition. And Thomas, I don't know where he is. When you go up to the centers, one of our partners is here. And the Digital ID Coalition basically helps to harness the lessons from different countries, and we share with each other, like what failed in Kenya. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to share with you why did the Digital ID fail in Kenya? So, and how can we borrow better lessons, like, for example, citizen-centered approach, public participation, and all that. So we've always shared in the wider space. There are different spaces also that are discussing the same problem. For example, in the next RightsCon, the digital ID movement around the world will be also having a side event for digital ID. There's also a space for the statelessness and inclusion space that we also share. There's also another space that we call the Digital ID Community ID for Africa that we share as work on side events. So there are a lot of conversations. If you just look at the Digital ID movement, online you'll find us. And there's also for citizenship rights in Africa. If you check all those sites, they share all those lessons.
Thank you. Next question, microphone 1, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I've really learned much today. I've been wondering if this drive of collecting data from the government has to do with the tech companies in Kenya. So is there a connection between all the tech companies doing data labeling and the government wanting to collect data?
Well, there are two things. Actually, it's not even pushed by the tech companies. It's pushed by the corporates who are hungry for data. Like, for example, during Maisha Namba, Huduma Namba, the reason as to why they were collecting this data, let me be blank. In Kenya, we don't have like a scoring system for credit. So the government was like, we'll help banks to develop a credit score. And they wanted to know, if you have land, can it be collateral? If you have animals, can they be collateral? But they were not sharing with citizens. But they were telling companies that we have people who already have assets. Can you give them money? So after the registration of Huduma Namba, people started getting weird messages from banks. You qualify for a loan, you qualify for a loan. They're like, okay, I didn't subscribe for any loans and all that. So yeah, there's a crunch for data, and it's coming from the corporates. They claim that they were struggling to get the real identity, but the fact is that they were trying to get more people to get loans. But for the government also, the attraction for digitalization is to increase the tax bands. So they're like, only 10% of the population is paying the taxes on behalf of the whole country. How do we make sure that the rest on board? So for Maisha Namba, one of the things that I forgot to tell is that when you reach the age of 18, by default, you're assigned a tax number. Without enrolling, by default, you'll be assigned a tax number. And if you fail to... And the tax number at zero. It's the first letter your child will get. Oh. So we are copying from you. Yeah, so unfortunately, when you are assigned a tax number, and by default you should be paying taxes or filing returns. So one of those things is that people will be having penalties that they don't know of because they did not register for a service. But at least I have heard where we copied it from.
Next question at microphone 3, please.
Hi. What are the main lessons learned from the Kenyan experience that we can apply to other countries?
I think the main lesson for me is hope in CSOs. In the shrinking civic space, the CSOs stood their ground. In the shrinking civic space, the CSOs were able to win. And we have a Data Protection Act that basically copied from Europe. It's actually a copy-paste from Europe, but it's at least a good copy-paste. We have the aspect of measuring what we call public participation because of CSOs. So basically, the lessons from Kenya will be like the power of the people coupled by the power of the CSOs could be able to do some good safeguards. The other thing that I could talk about, the lessons from Kenya, is the need for pushing for comprehensive legal framework for anchoring a digital ID. Because, as I said, data is the new oil, and you know what happens to mining. Open cast mines have killed more people than saved economies. So when you talk about mining, what are the safeguards of mining? So one of them is data protection, aspects of data minimalization, and all those are things that you could borrow from Kenya in terms of CSOs protecting the front.
Great. Microphone number 2 in the back, please.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have 2 questions. The first one is related to the impact or the influence from international institutions or other kind of former colonialist continents such as Europe on the digital ID system in Kenya. This is something that we see in other spaces, that those former colonialist powers, or still colonialist powers, are pushing for digital ID systems in the global south to enforce their migration and deportation systems. Is it something that you could trace in Kenya, is my first question. And the second is, throughout your talk, I could also sense a tension that we also see in our activism here in Europe regarding digital welfare policing. The fact that on the one hand you're pushing for inclusion or trying to fight digital exclusion, and at the same time we're kind of pushing people into a system where they're subjected to more surveillance, policing, algorithmic profiling and stuff, which are undermining their fundamental rights. And therefore, I was wondering if you had any kind of thought on reconciling those two goals, basically objectives, like one is digital inclusion or inclusion in social and public services versus surveillance-based policing systems. Thank you.
I come from a continent where the right to think that you can opt out does not exist. I come from a country basically that says you have to have an ID by force. It's an illegality not to have. So it's not a luxury that many can say that I choose not to enroll. The thing that we are trying to look at is, can I enroll and not authorize my data to be shared? Those are the things that we're looking at, which options exist. And in my country, I gave you the history of IDs. It's a colonial thing. So it was imposed on us, and we thought that is the best thing that ever happened on us. And for communities that I come from, because of our own safeguarding, one of the research that we did is that my community is over-documented, because they were like, okay, when you'll be asked about your grandparent, you have a document. And then the communities that have no burden, they're under-documented. So our communities feel the urge to register, but when we are pushing them, we are telling them how are the safer mechanisms to register. So unfortunately in Kenya, we cannot have that luxury of saying, don't enroll. We were asking them that, like for example, one of the judgments that we got is that you cannot coerce. But the government's way of saying that we will not coerce you is that we'll peg all services to these documents. For example, without a birth certificate in Kenya, you cannot register to sit an examination. And now, you cannot even enroll your child to school. And without an ID, you cannot register that birth certificate for your child. So basically, they peg services to a document. Not unless you freely exist and you don't have children, you can have that luxury to not register. But if you have children, if you want to work and all that, you will need a document in Kenya. So that decision is very hard for us to make for a person. We just basically have to say, what are the existing safeguards that are there? There are a lot of traces that we have seen, not only from the colonial masters. The new colonialist is the Gates Foundation. Yeah, so the philanthropic angle has an impact in the digital space, and they're the ones pushing for digitalization. They think that by digitalizing government services will solve all issues of poverty, because basically one of the aspects of DPI is money transfer. So for you to be able to be effective in terms of safety nets, you need to digitalize people and have a digital payment solution and all that. So there is stresses, and also out of that we also have the World Bank effect, and the new child on block is the UNDP, also pushing for this digitalization. So there's also the aspect of the international community and what they're playing. So it's not only our colonialists, but also the people who colonize the money that we spend in our countries. I hope I've answered you. Yes?
Great. We have a bit more time, so if you have more questions, make your way to the microphone, and we continue with microphone number 1.
Hi, thank you very much, first of all, for coming here and giving us this very interesting talk. And I have a question regarding Maisha number and the difference to Huduma number. Because all those, as I understand, all or most of those aspects listed there have been part of the registration or part of the data collected under Huduma number. And is it still similar amount for Maisha number, or have you, as the CSO, succeeded in, like, for example, removing the collection of economic data, animals, land, etc.?
So there are a bit of disparities. Like one, the name. Two, the similarity. The law anchoring Huduma number and Maisha number is the same. So it could also be canvassed. But the difference is now the government says we are not registering a new system. For any person making it to 18, by default, when you're getting an ID, it's a Maisha number. It's just digitalization of the services. Any child born as of 2022 is getting a birth certificate with UPI, basically a Maisha number. Some of the data that they're collecting is no longer part of these ones, is the normal ID registration. But the caveat is here. The Huduma Namba data is still under the same government, so they could process the same data. So it has never been expunged. The Huduma Namba secretariat that were hired are still getting salaries. What are they doing? The difference with the Maisha number is that now we know Maisha number is under 2 departments, civil registration and NRB, National Registration Bureau. For Huduma number, it was a joint secretariat that basically it was a loose department that permanent secretaries from Ministry of Interior, permanent secretaries from Ministry of ICT were working together, but the real custodian of the data was not known. Now at least we know who's the custodian of the data. We know who to sue and who not to sue. But so there's still a bit of shakiness because you are registering, but the same data that they had is still there. So we don't know what is the fate of the data that they had collected under Huduma number, because it's still with the same government and it is still being processed. Yes. The other difference is the fact that you're supposed to be given one number your entire life, from birth to death. So the anchor of all this number is supposed to be civil registration, that the one that registers you from birth. At least that is clear compared to Huduma number that basically they were doing a fresh registration for all people. So yes, people who have Huduma number have a card that they can use to maybe stop the door or to play with it in the house, but it's not functional. For the Maisha number, the card is functional as an ID. We can chat more. I hope I've not depressed you. Yes.
Okay, I'm taking a look around. Microphone number 4, please.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the talk. It was also pretty informative. I just wonder, like I spent some time in Namibia for the past 1.5 years, and actually, especially in the topics of digitalization, Kenya is one of the countries other African countries tend to look up to. Also because, I mean, it's a bit closer to the, well, organizational sphere of the African Union. And I mean, they have a digitalization, transformation strategy. And I was wondering now, I mean, I also know this effect that some African countries keep kind of copying things from Europe or America, or yeah, basically it is kind of due to the colonialists. But I mean, there are also strategies like for this African context, which I think work better because, I mean, there was the question of networking with people in the UK, but I mean, the UK is completely different, like you also stated, like you can't just copy something from a completely different continent and country to a country with a completely different culture. So I was thinking, aren't there like maybe more reasonable approaches that have been discussed between African countries to this matter? Because there were discussions, obviously, otherwise there wouldn't be a document like that. Thank you.
Well, there's a peer pressure network called ID for Africa that happens every year. And service providers, the IT tech, funders, CSOs. CSOs never had a space, they created the space by themselves, that basically discuss issues of policy, issues of the new technology, and all safeguards that are there. So at least there's been conversation. There is the African Protocol on Nationality Rights that has been passed by the AU, and that was championed by the CSOs, basically to try and look at what are the safeguards that you look at in terms of championing for digitalization of rights. And as I said, Kenya, because we've copied a lot, people also copying us. But there's also another network that we call 50 in 5 that is being mentored by Estonia, of African countries that are saying that they should have digitalized their systems within 5 years. So they're trying to have 50 countries that could move to digitalization in the next 5 years. So there's a lot of peer conversations. Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania have also been trying to push for a similar ID mechanism so that they could have the EU of Africa, where you could enter borders with your IDs. So Maisha Namba, Ndagamuntu in Uganda, and Kitambulisho in TZ are basically trying to look at, they call it the Samea card, trying to look at how do we digitalize our data, our borders to access with IDs. But one of the things that we are pushing these countries is that why do you have to have an ID that expires? Because you are saying that it has to meet the ICAO standards for you to be able to cross borders with it. So there is a lot of conversations of countries copying each other, but also there's also a conversation for CSOs, corporates, and all that in different spaces to be able to have safeguards. So there is a lot of country exchanges happening, and thank you for the question.
Next question, microphone number 1, please.
Hi, thanks for the talk. First of all, you stressed a lot on the fact that identity in Kenya is very much connected with colonialism. So I was wondering if there hasn't been this connection. Do you still think that the people have been involved in this fight against the new system?
Yeah. I've stressed a lot that we have a lot of history of colonialism in our identity system. And unfortunately, we wanted to rewrite our history, by saying that first and foremost, we should be a Pan-African country, that we should be more African and should not divide people. One of the problems that we have borrowed is exclusion when it comes to division of identity. One thing that we've always told countries is that best practice is to make sure that everybody is registered. Because if you are saying that your identity is linked to security, make sure that everybody is registered. Because in criminology, when you come to a crime scene, the first thing you do is test for fingerprint. So if there is no fingerprint to be traced, is that that person is a ghost. So the logic of saying that we are not giving particular communities IDs because of security is that you're creating more insecurity than solving issues of security. So one of the problems that we have been trying to tell people is that be more inclusive. Don't use IDs for exclusion, make it for inclusion. And Kenya at least has tried to solve a lot of this. We have solved issues of colonialism by registering people who had come from Mozambique as evangelists in 1953. We have solved issues of colonialism. For example, we've had borders that were designed to say, because there's a Pemba island in Tanzania and we have people called Pemba in Kenya, they're not Kenyans. We tried to push our CSOs to register people who were considered as stateless and non-Kenyans. So we've been trying to rewrite our history, but it's still a long process because our territories divided families within 2 different areas. The last part of your question.
Yeah, was if there wasn't this heritage, do you think that people would still fight against the new system, or maybe not? Maybe they wouldn't care at all?
I think the new system, we are trying to look at how do we safeguard. One of the things that we said is that digitalization is a ship that has already sailed. But how do you make sure that people who have already sailed with it are safeguarded? Are there enough laws? Are there enough safeguards that protect people from exclusion and all that? Yes, we fight it, but we are looking, the CSOs have shifted from being people who oppose and to be people who are giving solution. Like for the first time, we're telling government you have to have DPI at 5 different levels. We have to have public participation at every constituency level. So we are giving solutions and not just blankly fighting. Yes.
All right, I'm taking a look. Any more questions on the internet? In that case, final question is from me. If people want to talk to you more, where can they find you, either here at Congress or online?
Well, if you want to talk to me more, I'm available. I'll be roaming around. My name on LinkedIn is Mustafa Mahmoud Yusuf. It's the same YOUSIF. If you look at the profile on the agenda, my name is the same. You can look for me on LinkedIn, all social media. But if you are also around, we could exchange contacts and all that. And also you can check namati.org. You'll see our work. We work in Kenya, Bangladesh, and other countries. But in citizenship, we work around Kenya and Bangladesh mostly.
Okay, excellent work. Please join me in giving a huge round of applause to Mustafa Mahmoud.